My son, the one I rocked to sleep and worked my fingers to the bone for, stood in the doorway of the house I bought with my own sweat and tears, and he told me I was dead to him. His words were meant to be the end of my story, a final, cruel dismissal. He had no idea they were just the beginning of his. Every family has its secrets, its heartbreaks, and sometimes, its day of reckoning. This is a story about what happens when a mother's love is pushed past its breaking point. It's a story about the devastating power of words, and the quiet, unshakable strength it takes to have the last one. If you believe that respect is earned, not owed, then you're in the right place. Do me a favor and hit that like button, and subscribe so you don't miss a single story of justice served. Now, let's get into it. Part 1. The Setup and the Injustice. It's funny, the things you remember. It's never the big, dramatic moments that stick with you, not really. It's the little things. The weight of a sleeping child in your arms, the smell of rain on hot asphalt after a summer storm, the specific shade of yellow of the crayon he used to draw a wobbly sun on the refrigerator door. For me, I remember the feel of Daniel's tiny hand wrapped around my index finger. His grip was so tight, so trusting. I was his entire world, his sun, his moon, his stars. And he was mine. My husband, Tom, passed when Daniel was only 5. A heart attack, sudden and brutal, that ripped the future we'd planned right out from under us. I remember standing in our tiny apartment, the silence so loud it felt like a physical weight, holding a bewildered little boy and making him a promise. I whispered it into his hair as he cried. "It's okay, baby," I told him. "Mommy's here. I'll never let anything bad happen to you. I'll always take care of you." And I did. I took that promise and turned it into my life's mission. I was Mary Harlow, a single mother, and a waitress at the Greasy Spoon Diner downtown. But those were just titles. My real job, my purpose, was being Daniel's foundation. I worked double shifts until my feet swelled up twice their normal size and my back screamed in protest. I'd come home smelling of fried onions and stale coffee, so tired I could barely see straight, but I'd still sit at the kitchen table and help him with his fractions. I learned to patch his jeans with iron-on dinosaurs and turn one chicken into 3 different meals. My own needs became a distant echo. New shoes? Daniel needed cleats for soccer. A nagging toothache? Daniel needed to go on the class trip to the science museum. I became an expert at smiling and saying, "I'm fine, I don't need a thing," while my stomach growled and my socks were thin. And I didn't mind. Truly, I didn't. Watching him grow, healthy and happy, was all the payment I ever needed. Seeing him walk across the stage to get his high school diploma, his face beaming. That was my Michelin star meal, my tropical vacation, my winning lottery ticket, all rolled into one. The first cracks started to show in college. I'd managed, through sheer force of will and 1,000 extra shifts, to scrape together enough for him to go to a decent state school without taking on too much debt. I was so proud. But the phone calls changed. They were no longer about his classes or the funny thing his roommate did. They began to have a specific cadence. A few minutes of feigned interest in my life, and then the pivot. "So, Mom, the thing is, my meal plan doesn't really cover weekends, and all the guys go out for pizza. Hey Mom, there's this textbook I absolutely have to have, and it's like $150. Mom, my laptop is acting up again, and I can't write my papers. I saw a new one on sale." And I always gave in. I'd transfer the money, telling myself it was for his education, for his future. I'd eat toast for dinner for a week to cover it, but I'd tell him not to worry. The gratitude, which used to be effusive, slowly thinned to a curt thanks, and then eventually to nothing at all. The call would just end once the transaction was confirmed. When he graduated and moved back home for a while, the distance grew even wider, paradoxically, now that we were under the same roof. He saw the house not as a home, but as a hotel. A free place to sleep and eat while he figured things out. He'd leave his dirty dishes in the sink, his laundry piled in the hallway, and walk past me with his headphones on, lost in his own world. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a stranger who slept in my son's bedroom. His figuring things out phase lasted for years and consisted of a string of brilliant, can't-miss business ideas that always required a small startup investment from me. First, It was a subscription box for artisanal dog treats. I gave him $2,000 from my savings. It folded in 3 months after he spent most of the money on a fancy website and brand-building lunches. Then it was a plan to import and resell high-end European coffee makers. It's foolproof, Mom. The margins are insane. That was a $5,000 loan I had to take out against the house. He sold 2. One was to me. Each failure was never his fault. It was always the market, the suppliers, the economy, my lack of faith in him. He never seemed to learn, never seemed to feel the sting of failure deeply enough to change course. Because he never really failed. I was always there to absorb the impact. I was the safety net he had grown so used to, he no longer even saw the ropes. The final straw came on a Tuesday. A dreary, rain-slicked evening in October. I was in the kitchen, soaking my aching feet in a bowl of hot water and Epsom salts, when Daniel came in. He was 30 years old, living in a ridiculously expensive apartment downtown that I knew for a fact he couldn't afford. He hadn't called me in 6 weeks. Not for my birthday, not just to check in. But here he was, pacing my linoleum floor with the frantic energy of a caged animal. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't comment on the pot of stew simmering on the stove, the one I still made every fall because it used to be his favorite. He just launched into it. Mom, I have the opportunity of a lifetime. A real game changer this time, he started, his eyes wide with that familiar, manic gleam. It was a new venture. Something about developing a mobile app for exclusive, last-minute restaurant reservations. It sounded like all the others. Vague, grandiose, and full of buzzwords he'd picked up from the internet. It's a guaranteed home run, he said, leaning against the counter. But I need to show the investors I have skin in the game. I need a cosigner on a business loan. It's just a formality, really. $50,000. The bank will approve it in a heartbeat with your name on it, with the house as collateral. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The expensive haircut, the designer jacket, the watch on his wrist that probably cost more than my car. I saw not my son, but a caricature of success, a hollow man built on a foundation of my sacrifices. And for the first time, a quiet, firm no began to form in my mind. Daniel, I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. I can't do that. He blinked, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. What do you mean, you can't? It's just a signature. It's not just a signature. It's my house. It's everything I have. It's the only thing your father and I ever truly owned. My voice grew stronger. All your other ventures, the dog treats, the coffee makers, they all ended the same way. I can't risk losing my home. His face began to cloud over. The charming salesman vanished, replaced by a petulant child. Oh, I see. So you don't believe in me. After everything, you still think I'm going to fail. This isn't about believing in you, Daniel. This is about being practical. I'm 64 years old. I can't recover from a loss like that. You're 30. You have time to build things on your own, the right way. The air in the room grew thick and cold. His jaw tightened. He pushed himself off the counter, his posture radiating a sudden, chilling aggression. The right way? He sneered, the words dripping with contempt. You mean like you did? Working yourself to death for tips at some rundown greasy spoon? You think that's something to be proud of? That's not a life, Mom. That's a pathetic existence. Each word was a physical blow. I felt the air rush out of my lungs. Pathetic. My life, the one I had dedicated to him, was pathetic. The years of exhaustion, the missed moments, the quiet pride I took in my independence and resilience. All of it reduced to a single ugly word. I stood up, my wet feet dripping on the floor. I did what I had to do, I said, my voice trembling now, a mixture of hurt and rising anger. I did it so you could have a life better than mine. So you could have choices I never did. I did it all for you. He laughed. A short, barking, utterly mirthless sound. For me? You did it for you. So you could play the martyr. The sainted, long-suffering single mother. You love it. You love telling people how much you sacrificed. It's your whole identity. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and shameful. I wouldn't let him see them. Get out, Daniel. Oh, I'm going, he snarled, grabbing his car keys from the hook by the door. He turned, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. And then came the words. The words that would echo in the silent corners of my house for years to come. You know what, Mom? You're dead to me. Dad. I don't need you, and I don't want anything from you ever again. Not your lectures, not your sad sack stories, and certainly not your money. He spat the last word out like it was poison. He yanked the door open, and a gust of cold, wet wind swept into my warm kitchen. He paused for a moment on the threshold, and for a split second, I saw the little boy I used to know, his face twisted in a way I didn't recognize. I hoped, he might take it back. He didn't. He just gave me one last look of utter disdain and slammed the door behind him. The sound vibrated through the floorboards, rattling a picture frame on the wall. A photo of a 5-year-old Daniel on his first day of school, smiling a gappy, joyful smile. I stood there in the middle of my kitchen, the water at my feet now cold. The stew on the stove, his favorite, was starting to burn. I could smell it. The silence he left behind was heavier, more profound, than the silence after Tom had died. This was a different kind of death. This was a death by 1,000 cuts, and the final blow had just been delivered by my own son. My heart didn't just break. It shattered. It turned to dust inside my chest. I whispered into the empty room, my voice hoarse. All right, Daniel. If that's how you feel. And in that crushing, deafening silence, surrounded by the ghosts of a happy childhood and the smell of a burnt dinner, I finally understood. My son didn't just take my love for granted. He saw it as a liability. He didn't just see me as a mother. He saw me as a wallet. And now that the wallet was closed, I was, for all intents and purposes, dead. And as I stood there, utterly alone, I realized my son was gone for good. But I had no idea who was about to take his place. Part 2. The struggle and the escalation. The first week after Daniel stormed out was a blur of hollow routines. I'd wake up, make a full pot of coffee out of habit, and then pour most of it down the drain. I'd walk past his old bedroom, the door slightly ajar, and feel a phantom ache, the same way a person feels a limb that's no longer there. The house, which had always felt cozy and full of memories, now just felt empty. Every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of the pipes, seemed to amplify the silence he had left in his wake. His words, "You're dead to me," played on a loop in my head. They were my first thought in the morning and my last thought before a fitful, dream-plagued sleep. I'd be washing dishes and the phrase would just pop into my mind, stealing my breath. I'd be in the garden, pulling weeds, and the sheer venom in his voice would echo in my ears, making my hands tremble. He hadn't just insulted me, he had erased me. He had taken 30 years of my life, of my love and sacrifice, and declared it null and void. I kept expecting him to call. I'd imagine the scenario over and over. He'd be remorseful, his voice thick with shame. He'd apologize, I'd cry, and we'd somehow, painstakingly, begin to patch the gaping wound he'd torn in our family. My phone would buzz with a text from the pharmacy or a spam call, and for a split second, my heart would leap with a pathetic, desperate hope. But the call never came. The only communication I received was a single, curt text message about 2 weeks later. It read, "Need to get the rest of my old stuff from the attic this weekend. Will be there sat around 2. Leave the side door unlocked. No, hi Mom. No, I'm sorry. No, can we talk?" Just a logistical demand. He was treating me like a storage unit manager. I typed and deleted a dozen replies. Some angry, some pleading. In the end, I just wrote back, "Okay." That Saturday, I made myself scarce. I couldn't bear to see him. I went to the library and just sat there, staring at the pages of a book I wasn't reading, until 3 o'clock. When I got home, the side door was locked again. I went up to the attic. Boxes had been rummaged through, and a few things were gone. Old trophies, some college memorabilia, a vintage stereo system Tom had left him. But what he'd left behind was more telling. Piles of childhood drawings, his first teddy bear with one button eye, a box of carefully preserved school projects I had saved for decades. All of it, the tangible evidence of his childhood, of my motherhood, was left scattered and discarded. He hadn't wanted memories. He had wanted assets. That was when the grief began to harden. Like water turning to ice, the raw, aching sadness began to crystallize into something colder, sharper. Resignation. And a flicker of anger. It was in this desolate state that my niece Emily found me. My late sister Susan's daughter. Susan had been my best friend, and her death from cancer a few years back had been another devastating blow. Emily was in her mid-20s, a quiet, gentle soul with her mother's kind eyes and an old-fashioned sense of duty. She lived a few towns over, working a modest administrative job at a community clinic and taking night classes to become a paralegal. She called one evening, her voice hesitant. "Aunt Mary? Hey. I was just thinking about you. How are you doing?" It was such a simple question, but it broke through the dam of my solitude. I found myself telling her everything. The words just tumbled out. Daniel's business schemes, the argument, the horrible things he'd said. I cried, for the first time since that night. I didn't have to be strong for Emily. I didn't have to pretend. She didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. She just listened. When I was finished, there was a pause on the line. Then she said, so softly, "I'm so sorry, Aunt Mary. No one should ever be spoken to like that. Especially not you. And then, do you mind if I come by this weekend? I'll bring lasagna." That weekend was the first time I had felt a glimmer of warmth in weeks. Emily didn't treat me like a fragile old woman. She came in, gave me a real hug, the kind that holds you together, and we ate lasagna on TV trays while watching an old black and white movie. She noticed the constant drip of the kitchen faucet and, without a word, pulled a small toolkit from her car and fixed it. She saw the stack of mail on the counter and helped me sort through the bills and junk mail that had been overwhelming me. Her visits became a regular thing. She never came empty-handed, always with a loaf of bread, or a plant for the garden, or just a new magazine she thought I'd like. We fell into a comfortable rhythm. She would help me with chores that had become difficult for me. Reaching the high shelves, carrying the heavy bags of soil for my roses, fixing the squeaky hinge on the back door that had been driving me mad for months. One sunny Saturday, she showed up with 2 paintbrushes and a can of white paint and announced, "Today, we're giving this sad-looking garden fence a facelift." We spent the whole day painting, laughing and talking. She told me about her classes, the frustrations of her job, a boy she'd been on a few dates with. She asked me questions about her mom, eager for stories she'd never heard. As I talked about my sister, sharing memories of our childhood, I felt parts of myself I thought were long dead begin to stir. "You're so much like her," I told Emily one afternoon, as we sat on the newly painted fence, drinking iced tea. "She always had a good heart. Always saw what needed to be done and just did it. No fuss." Emily smiled, a little shyly. "Aunt Mary, you and my mom always took care of me after my dad left. You've always been like a second mother. Helping you isn't a chore. It's the least I can do." The contrast between her and Daniel was a chasm. Daniel saw me as a resource to be exploited. Emily saw me as a person to be cherished. Daniel's presence created chaos and anxiety. Emily's brought peace and comfort. Around Christmas, I got a stiff, formal-looking card in the mail. It was from Daniel. Inside, there was no message. No Merry Christmas, no hope you're well. Just a glossy, professional photo of him and a blonde woman I'd never seen before, standing in front of a ridiculously large Christmas tree in what looked like a ski lodge. They were both holding champagne glasses, their smiles wide and artificial. It wasn't a greeting, it was a performance. A statement. "See? I'm thriving without you. I don't need you." I dropped the card in the trash as if it were contaminated. A few days later, Emily came over with a small, clumsily wrapped gift. "It's not much," she said, looking embarrassed. "Just a little something." I opened it. Inside was a beautiful, heated throw blanket, the incredibly soft, plush kind. I had mentioned offhandedly weeks ago how my arthritis acted up in the cold and how I was always chilled in the evenings. I remembered the conversation clearly. It was a fleeting comment, the kind of thing most people would forget instantly. Daniel certainly would have. But Emily had remembered. I ran my hand over the impossibly soft fabric. It was such a small thing, a blanket. But it was everything. It was thoughtfulness. It was listening. It was care, woven into every fiber. I looked at her, my niece, who was juggling a full-time job and night school, who probably had to save up for weeks to afford this, and I felt a wave of emotion so powerful it made me dizzy. Daniel, with his expensive jackets and grand schemes, had never once given me a gift that showed he truly knew me. His presents, on the rare occasions he gave them, were always impersonal, last-minute things. A generic box of chocolates from the drugstore, a gift card to a chain restaurant. He saw the act of giving as a transaction, an obligation to be checked off a list. Emily saw me. I pulled the soft blanket around my shoulders, its warmth seeping into my bones. And in that moment, a fundamental shift occurred within me. The ice of my grief didn't just crack, it melted away entirely, replaced by a clear, cold, and powerful current of understanding. Love wasn't an obligation you paid into hoping for a return on your investment. It wasn't something you were owed by blood. It was a gift. A precious, freely given gift. And my son's account was utterly, irrevocably empty. The space he had occupied in my heart, a space that had remained his through years of neglect and disrespect, finally closed. The door was locked. And a new one was beginning to open. Part 3. The Turning Point and the Planning. For the next year and a half, my life settled into a new kind of normal. A quieter, more peaceful existence, punctuated by the steady, comforting presence of Emily. We became more than aunt and niece. We became confidants, companions. We celebrated small victories, her acing a particularly difficult exam, my roses blooming more vibrantly than ever before. We weathered small sorrows, a sick friend, a bill that was higher than expected. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like a utility. I felt like a person. Daniel remained a ghost, a specter from a past life. I heard about him only in disjointed fragments from distant relatives who would call with gossip. He had apparently broken up with the blonde from the Christmas card. His restaurant app venture had, predictably, imploded. There was a rumor he was deep in debt, but no one knew the details. He never reached out. Not on my 65th birthday. Not on the anniversary of his father's death. The silence from his end was absolute, a confirmation of his final words to me. I was dead to him. And with each passing day, I began to accept it. The turning point wasn't a single, dramatic event. It was a slow, creeping realization, born out of quiet evenings wrapped in the heated blanket Emily had given me. It came to me as I looked around the little house that I had worked so hard to pay off, the house I had kept pristine, the house that was my only real asset in the world. This was my legacy. The sum total of a life of hard work. And the thought of Daniel inheriting it, of him selling it without a second thought to fund another one of his pathetic doomed schemes, began to feel like a profound injustice. Not just to me, but to the memory of his father, and to the very idea of what a family should be. He didn't deserve this house. He didn't deserve the comfort and security it represented. He had forfeited his right to it the moment he'd spat those venomous words at me. Legacy, I realized, isn't just about passing down material possessions. It's about passing down values. What value would I be endorsing by rewarding his cruelty? The decision settled in my soul not with a fiery rage, but with a calm, steely resolve. It felt less like an act of revenge and more like an act of cosmic balancing. It was simply the right thing to do. I didn't want a family lawyer, someone who knew our history and might try to talk me into a reconciliation. I needed someone impartial, a stranger who would see only the legal facts. I found a Mr. Abernathy online, an older gentleman with a small, respectable practice specializing in estate planning. Making the appointment was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. My hand trembled as I dialed the number. It felt so final. Mr. Abernathy's office was what you'd expect. Walls paneled in dark wood, shelves lined with thick, leather-bound books, a faint smell of old paper and lemon polish. He was a tall, thin man with kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened patiently as I explained my situation. I didn't get emotional. I laid out the facts calmly, chronologically. The years of financial support, the failed businesses, the emotional neglect, and finally, the last conversation. I repeated Daniel's final words to him verbatim. He told me I was dead to him, and that he wanted nothing from me ever again. Mr. Abernathy steepled his fingers, his expression unreadable. And you wish to honor that request? I do, I said, my voice not wavering. I wish to update my will. I want to leave my entire estate, the house, my savings, the few shares I own in the diner. Everything to my niece, Emily Cooper. He raised a single, bushy eyebrow. Everything? You intend to completely disinherit your only son? That is correct. He leaned back in his chair, which groaned in protest. Mrs. Harlow, I have to advise you, this is highly unconventional. And it will almost certainly be contested. A son, especially an only child, has a strong expectation of inheritance in the eyes of the court. But is it legal? I asked. Perfectly legal, he admitted. It's your property. You can leave it to whomever you wish. But Daniel will be able to argue that you were not of sound mind, or that your niece exerted some kind of undue influence over you. The accusation stung, but I met his gaze. I am of perfectly sound mind, Mr. Abernathy. Perhaps for the first time in my life. And Emily has no idea I'm even here. She has never asked me for a single penny. She has only ever given me her time, her help, and her kindness. That is her only influence. Can you put that in a legal document? He studied my face for a long moment. I think he saw the years of quiet disappointment etched there, the exhaustion, but also the unshakable certainty. He finally gave a slow nod. We can take steps to fortify the will, he said, his tone shifting from cautionary to practical. We can include a specific disinheritance clause that explicitly names your son and the reasons for your decision. We can have you undergo a competency evaluation with a doctor, and have the will signing witnessed by multiple people, including the doctor. We will make it as ironclad as possible. The process took weeks. I met with a geriatric psychiatrist who asked me a battery of questions about my life, my health, my relationships. It was clinical and impersonal, but I answered everything honestly. At the end of the evaluation, she deemed me highly competent and clear in my intentions. The day I went back to sign the final papers, I felt a strange mixture of profound sadness and liberating peace. This wasn't a joyous occasion. It was the formal, legal end of a relationship that had defined my entire adult life. It was a mother's final, painful act of letting go. Mr. Abernathy read the key clause aloud before I signed. It was stark and brutal in its clarity. To my son, Daniel Harlow, who on the evening of October 14, 2023, informed me that I was dead to him and that he wanted nothing further from me, I leave nothing. This decision is my own, made in a state of sound mind and clear memory, as a direct acknowledgement and fulfillment of his stated wish. May he find in life the success and independence he so desperately craves, on his own terms. And then the clause about Emily. I leave my entire estate, including my property at 45 Cherry Lane, all my savings and investments, and all personal effects, to my beloved niece, Emily Cooper. I do this not out of obligation, but out of immense gratitude for the selfless love, comfort, and respect she has shown me. She has been the daughter of my heart in these final years, and has reminded me that family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty and kindness. My hand was steady as I signed my name at the bottom. The witnesses, a doctor and Mr. Abernathy's paralegal, added their signatures. It was done. As I left his office and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, I felt lighter. The weight of decades of one-sided obligation, of thankless sacrifice, had been lifted. I had spent so much of my life trying to provide a future for a son who refused to grow up. Now, I could provide a future for a young woman who had already shown more maturity and grace than he ever had. That evening, I was sitting on my porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. For a moment, a wave of doubt washed over me. A memory surfaced. Daniel, age 7, falling off his bike and scraping his knee, crying for me, and me running to scoop him up, telling him it would all be okay. Was I being too harsh? Was this a cruel, unforgivable act? Just then my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Is this Mary Harlow? A cold, professional voice asked. Yes. This is John Casey from Sterling Collections. I'm calling in reference to a Mr. Daniel Harlow. He listed you as a personal reference on a credit application from 6 months ago. He is now severely delinquent on his payments, totaling over $7,000. As we have been unable to reach him, we are contacting his references to obtain a current address or place of employment. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, the beautiful sunset forgotten. 6 months ago. Right after his app idea must have failed. He hadn't called me to apologize. He hadn't called to see how I was. But he had used my name, my reputation, as a shield one last time while taking on more debt. Any lingering shred of doubt I had vanished, burned away by the cold, hard truth. He hadn't changed. He would never change. I'm sorry, I said to the debt collector, my voice as calm and clear as a winter morning. I can't help you. I don't have a son. I hung up the phone. I went inside and found the photo of my late husband Tom on the mantelpiece. I picked up the dusty frame and wiped it clean. I looked at his smiling, handsome face. I did it, Tom, I whispered to the empty room. I did what was right for our family. Not the one we lost, but the one I found. And for the next 2 years, I finally, truly, lived in peace. Part 4. The Execution and the Fallout. Those last 2 years of my life were a gift. With the heavy burden of Daniel's expectations lifted, it felt like I could finally breathe. The quiet hum of anxiety that had been my constant companion for decades faded away, replaced by a gentle contentment. My life wasn't exciting, not by the world's standards. But it was mine. Emily and I filled those years with simple joys. We planted a vegetable garden in the backyard, and I taught her my mother's secret for growing prize-winning tomatoes. She helped me go through boxes of old photographs, and we organized them into albums, laughing at the outdated hairstyles and crying a little at the faces of people long gone. She finished her paralegal degree, graduating with honors, and I was there in the audience, cheering louder than anyone. Seeing her walk across that stage, her face glowing with pride and accomplishment, was a purer, more profound joy than I had ever felt at any of Daniel's graduations. This was earned. This was real. I never told her about the will. I didn't want to place that weight on her. I didn't want our relationship to be colored by it. I wanted her love to remain a gift, freely given, not an investment with an expected payout. My gift to her would come later. My health began to decline, as it does. My heart, which had endured so much, was getting tired. I grew weaker, but I was never alone. Emily arranged her schedule so she could be with me most evenings. We'd sit together, me in my comfortable armchair wrapped in my heated blanket, and she'd read to me from the newspaper, or we'd just watch the world go by from the living room window. There was no fear. Just a quiet acceptance. On my last day, she held my hand, her grip warm and steady, just as mine had been for her own mother. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, the future felt secure. I had placed my legacy in the right hands. I passed away peacefully in my sleep that night. Shift to an omniscient, narrative tone. The reading of the will took place 1 week later, in the same dark wood-paneled office of Mr. Abernathy. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Emily sat on one side of the large mahogany desk, looking small and lost in her simple black dress, her eyes red-rimmed from a week of mourning. On the other side of the desk, Daniel slouched in a leather chair. He had shown up 5 minutes late, dressed in an ill-fitting shiny suit that screamed desperation. He looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes, but he wore a mask of bored arrogance. He hadn't attended the funeral. He'd claimed he was out of the country on business. But he had certainly made time for this. He tapped his foot impatiently, occasionally glancing at his phone, already mentally spending the money he believed was his birthright. To him, this was not about mourning a mother, it was the final, long-overdue payday. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. He adjusted his glasses and began to read the will in a dry, emotionless monotone. He started with the standard legal jargon, the declaration of sound mind and body. Daniel rolled his eyes, sighing audibly. "Can we just get to the numbers?" he interrupted. Mr. Abernathy fixed him with a cold stare over the top of his spectacles. I will read the document as it was written, Mr. Harlow. He continued. He reached the clause pertaining to Daniel. The room seemed to get colder. To my son, Daniel Harlow. Mr. Abernathy read, his voice steady. Daniel sat up straighter, a smug, triumphant smirk beginning to form on his lips. This was it. Who on the evening of October 14, 2023, informed me that I was dead to him and that he wanted nothing further from me. I leave nothing. The smirk on Daniel's face didn't just fade, it collapsed. It was as if the muscles in his face had suddenly forgotten how to function. His mouth fell slightly open. The color drained from his skin, leaving it a sickly, pale gray. Mr. Abernathy didn't pause. This decision is my own, made in a state of sound mind and clear memory, as a direct acknowledgement and fulfillment of his stated wish. May he find in life the success and independence he so desperately craves, on his own terms. A strangled sound escaped Daniel's throat, a cross between a gasp and a choke. He stared at the lawyer, then at Emily, his eyes wild with disbelief. Emily, who had known nothing of this, looked down at her hands, tears welling in her eyes, not of joy, but of shock and a deep, sorrowful understanding. The lawyer continued, his voice unwavering, reading the clause that left the entire estate, the house, the savings, every last thing, to Emily Cooper, citing her selfless love, comfort, and respect. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a living thing, pressing in on them, suffocating. Daniel was the first to break it. He shot to his feet, the chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. "What?" he roared, his voice cracking. "No. No. This is a joke. This is some kind of sick, twisted joke." He pointed a trembling finger at Emily. "She did this. She manipulated her. The old woman was senile, and this little leech poisoned her mind against me." Emily flinched as if struck, but she didn't speak. Mr. Abernathy remained perfectly calm. He closed the folder containing the will and, with a deliberate slowness, slid another one across the desk toward Daniel. "It's all legal and binding, Mr. Harlow. Your mother made her choice with the utmost clarity. In that folder, you will find a copy of her signed competency evaluation from a licensed psychiatrist, dated 2 days before the will was executed. You will also find a notarized letter, written in her own hand, reiterating her reasons. It is, as we lawyers say, ironclad." Daniel stared at the folder as if it were a snake. He didn't touch it. His face contorted into a mask of pure rage. "I'll fight this. I'll take this to court. I'll drag her name through the mud for years. That house is mine." "You are welcome to try," Mr. Abernathy said coolly. "But you will lose. And you will be responsible for all legal fees, both yours and the estate's. Given your current financial situation, I would advise strongly against it." The mention of his financial situation hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. The last of his bluster evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked panic. The safety net he had always assumed would be there, the one he had scorned and taken for granted his entire life, was gone. He looked around the room, his eyes darting back and forth, seeing no allies, no way out. He had written the script for his own demise, and now he was being forced to play his part. He let out a guttural scream of pure frustration and slammed his fist on the mahogany desk, then stormed out of the office, slamming the door so hard that a framed print on the wall tilted sideways. The fallout was exactly as Mary had predicted. Daniel carried the weight of his own words for the rest of his days. The fortune he was so certain was his, the one he had planned to use to rescue himself from his mountain of debt, vanished into thin air. He threatened to sue but could find no lawyer willing to take his case once they reviewed the paperwork. The story spread through the family, and the little sympathy anyone had for him evaporated when they learned the full truth. He was forced to declare bankruptcy, to give up his fancy apartment and his leased car. He became a cautionary tale, a man undone not by misfortune, but by his own arrogance and cruelty. The last anyone heard, he was working a low-level sales job, bitter and alone, forever haunted by the inheritance he had literally talked himself out of. And Emily? She was overwhelmed, but she handled the legacy with the same grace and respect she had shown Mary in life. She didn't sell the little house on Cherry Lane. She moved in, finished paying off her student loans, and used the rest of the savings to start a small, non-profit paralegal service helping low-income families navigate the court system. She kept the house just as Mary had liked it. The rose bushes in the front yard bloomed brighter than ever. She found Mary's journals, filled with decades of entries, and through them, she truly understood the depth of her aunt's pain, and the quiet strength behind her final decision. The will wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of love. A final lesson from a woman who had learned all too late that you must water the garden that grows, not the one that is barren. Family, Mary had written in her final entry, isn't about blood. It's not about who you are born to, but who shows up. It's about gratitude, respect, and a love that is proven not with words of demand, but with quiet acts of kindness. It is a lesson that Emily carried with her always, a legacy far more valuable than any house or bank account. It was the legacy of a mother's love, finally given to a daughter who truly deserved it. In the end, Mary Harlow didn't just disinherit her son, she held up a mirror to him, forcing him to see the reflection of the man he had become. She honored his wish with a devastating precision, proving that words have power, and that sometimes, the most profound act of self-respect is to simply take someone at their word. Daniel wanted his mother to be dead to him, and in doing so, he killed his own future. This story serves as a chilling reminder that the people we take for granted are often the very pillars holding up our world. When we chip away at those pillars with disrespect and entitlement, we shouldn't be surprised when the whole structure comes crashing down around us. Mary's revenge wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, legal, and final. It was the last word in a conversation her son started, a heartbreaking but necessary closing of a chapter, and the beautiful, hopeful beginning of a new one. What do you think? Was Mary's decision the ultimate act of justice, or did she go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories of long-awaited, well-deserved revenge. Thank you for listening.